Welcome, everyone. We are so glad you are joining us. My name is Dr. Natasha Falahi, the Sensitive Doctor, and I am very excited to introduce our special guest today, Asha Clinton. Asha Clinton's life mission is treating people's suffering so they can discover and live who they really are. She developed Advanced Integrative Therapy, or AIT, to achieve this goal. A former Princeton professor in full-time practice for 37 years, she developed and taught 14 AIT seminars focusing on the comprehensive treatment of attachment, personality, anxiety, and dissociative disorders, and on the treatment of historical trauma, psychogenic illness, triggers, and spiritual blockage. For over 2 decades, she has taught AIT to healthcare professionals, shamans, healers, and people on the path of spiritual development, as well as for humanitarian aid internationally. Asha, it is a great pleasure to have you joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited to have this conversation. I personally have, healed and benefited a lot from AIT and the work that you've done. So I'm so excited and honored to have you here. And I'd love for you to share with us about yourself. Do you consider yourself an empath or a sensitive person? And how did you come about doing the work that you do?
Well, I had a very difficult childhood. And for most of us, that's an excellent qualification for being a sensitive. I grew up with a mother who had no empathy whatsoever. And what that does for many of us is give us a wound right in the middle of our hearts because it means we haven't been empathized with very much. That's a wonderful place to become an empath from, because as you start to heal yourself, no matter what kind of healing is involved, all of a sudden it's like a curtain is moved aside. And what's there is your own heart. And then you notice, oh my God, my friend, whoever it is in pain. And my other friend is just so angry. And I feel so for both of them, whether they're angry or in pain, because my heart keeps opening more and more. And where intuition is concerned, I think every woman in my family is loaded with just that, because for me, both familially and culturally, in order to survive, you had to be tuned into everything that was happening. And the kind of tuning in that was necessary for survival in my family was definitely intuition. Everybody has it. So I think, obviously, from what I've just said, that trauma is the great school for empaths, for sensitives, and for intuitives. At least it's been my school. And I got a very good education, but the tuition could be hard at times.
Yeah, definitely. And, through your journey and, personal life and your professional life, you developed this technique called Advanced Integrative Therapy, or AIT for short. And tell us, what is AIT? Is it, been referred to as an energy psychology, or involves transpersonal psychology? Tell us what it is, describe it a little bit, and tell us how you developed it.
If you don't mind, I'd like to start with why it is the way it is. Like a lot of young therapists, after I finished my degrees, what I wanted to do was study every kind of therapy there was. And the variety that there is now. There was an equally fascinating variety when I came out of social work school in the 80s. And I went from seminar to workshop to seminar to workshop. And each of them focused on something different. That was why it was so important to learn all of them. And I realized that there was no therapy, a modern therapy, that is to say, that really took everything and held it together in the same pair of arms. And I also realized that most of what I was seeing with my clients in terms of why they were in pain why they were hallucinating, why they were overeating, whatever the major symptoms were. It was all trauma. So I started to think in terms of trauma as the top rubric to think about. And of course, what happens if you're doing that is that you begin to realize, oh my God, there's different kinds of trauma. And in my case, because my mind is sort of an exploratory kind of mind, I wanted to see what kinds of traumas there really were, how you could work with them. And I realized that we were really short of what was necessary. There was some kind of special thing that we were missing. And I can't tell you the circumstance because I honestly don't remember anymore. But I know that I came conscious in a very sudden way that trauma causes everything. Once I was conscious of that, I started looking at, well, how can I use this knowledge? And little by little, I got answers. About the same time, I heard from a friend and colleague that there was this new thing called EFT, emotional freedom therapy. And I went and got trained. Then I heard there was TFT, TAT, BSFF, EMDR, and a couple more. I learned all of them, and I realized that the missing piece were actually two pieces. Focusing with trauma as the focus was the first piece.
I'm really familiar with your work. AIT has been really instrumental in my healing and my growth, and it's been a really fascinating technique to dive into. Can you tell us a little bit about what AIT is and how you came about developing it?
Happily. First of all, the missing link that a lot of us had in the late 70s, early 80s, when all of these energy psychology methods began to be developed, was energy itself. It's one thing to look at matter, which is what we old Newtonians used to do. But when you add energy into the process, you can actually move negativized, traumatized energy, not only out of the body, but out of the psyche and out of the spirit. That's revolutionary. That's amazing, because it isn't just words that I'm speaking, it's the actual truth.
Yeah.
So one morning I was standing in my office realizing that I had gold in my hands, the kind of gold that a person like me likes to have. And I said, okay, I understand that energy is the missing ingredient that we've been missing all this time. So what am I going to do about it? And I thought, the meridian system moves energy. In other words, the Chinese medicine system. And then I thought how many of the points I would have to memorize information about in order to use the meridian system. And I realized that my intuition was pulling me in another direction. My intuition kept saying chakras, chakras, chakras. And so I decided I would see what would happen if I would use the traditional chakras to treat something. I had had a fight with my young son at the time, and I wasn't that upset, but I wanted to see what would happen if I took the energy away from that fight. So I stood up. I thought you needed to stand up. It was so much at the beginning. I put one hand on my heart chakra because I knew that we were having the kind of tussle that mothers and sons have occasionally, and it was emotional. And I made a phrase which was probably something like, he's angry at me and I'm angry at him. He's angry at me, I'm angry at him. And I just started going down the chakras with the phrase, he's angry at me, I'm angry at him, and so on. And I added a chakra or two that I thought was missing from the original bunch. And I got all the way to the root chakra and sort of looked up and realized that although I had felt some anger before, I felt none at all by the time I'd touched each of the chakras, and said my little phrase.
Yeah.
It blew me away because I wasn't expecting to create anything. I was expecting to find some other teacher who would teach me. And so from that afternoon in my office, from that first experience of moving energy so simply and so easily, I decided I would try and treat everything on myself and whichever other family member would agree to it, just to see where this would go. I was afraid to go to a client with it. So I started treating all of my issues that I could think of at the time, and my husband's, my son's, more peripheral family members, my best friends. And all of a sudden, I started seeing that there were differences between what worked with one person and the next. Mm-hmm. And I kept incorporating everything that felt like it needed to be added or changed. And so, having begun somewhere in mid-1998, by the year 2000, I had put together a book of all the protocols I had developed. Mm-hmm. And there's one thing I haven't said about this that I should say. I realized that what was happening as this thing was developing, it was not my intellect thinking things through in a logical and organized manner, like my husband, for example, would have done if he had been in the same position. I realized that it was my intuition, and it was a little bit of sensitivity, and it certainly was my open heart, which was, of course, opening more and more as I treated more and more of the things that were bothering me. Yeah. And I noticed that those things were mostly from childhood. Yeah. And I realized that treatment had to begin with childhood. Mm. It all unfolded by my having the experience of trying new things, and then my intuition saying, this one won't work. Mm. That one is really good. And it was an adventure. It was like somebody else being, on some other planet, since that may begin in the not too distant future. But it was like being on a foreign planet and being an explorer. Yeah. It's been going on now for 22 years.
Wow. Yeah, I was introduced to it as a client, as a receiver of it about 15 years ago. And I can say, I hope this does it justice in explaining how, walking into it and experiencing it. But it was during a period in which I had hit my rock bottom. I was really, really suffering and kind of in ways that I couldn't understand why. I didn't have any massive sort of trauma, like a car accident or a major loss, or I didn't have anything that was obvious as to why my health was declining, why emotionally I was experiencing depression and severe anxiety. And so I was dismissed by every person, every doctor that I went to, because they just couldn't find something wrong with my body or any sort of like testing. They looked at this young, undergraduate student at the time. And it was kind of serendipitous that I was really dysfunctional. I had to drop out of school after being a straight A student. I was, living with my parents, had no really reason, no will to continue living. And somehow serendipitously, I found myself in the office of a really lovely psychotherapist who was practicing AIT. And from my experience as like an outsider, not really knowing any of this, but always being a sensitive person, it was sort of my introduction to the chakras and using them in an applicable way. And it was this really lovely combination for me as a receiver of being able to use a little bit of what I would have considered talk therapy, where I could talk about some stuff, but other therapists I had gone to where I just talk about my problems, it was like, okay, I let it out a little bit. Maybe they gave me some advice or some tools, but at a certain point in the session, we would talk about stuff. And then we went into muscle testing, and I was so fascinated by this. And I was like, wow, you can test a muscle, even remotely. You can test a muscle to get an answer for my subconscious, for my energy fields. And using that as part of the technique where it was muscle testing, thinking about my experiences, my emotions, my past, my thoughts and beliefs, and then using this kind of what you showed us, this kind of somatic energy release from the body. It really brought together all of these components that I had never experienced in healing, where it was a combination of somatic body, touch, energy, along with my thoughts and my beliefs, along with kind of testing something that I felt like validated something outside of my subjective experience. So it was this really fascinating combination of that for me. And I was, amazed. I was able to come out of some severe anxiety attacks and depression within a week or two. I mean, stuff that was like, doctors were like, if you go for past this point, you're going to be on meds for the rest of your life. And,
No way.
so yeah, exactly. Like that wasn't something that my intuition was willing to accept. So that, was my introduction about 15 years ago. And then I continued that work. And it's just been such a fascinating, like you said, kind of integration, like advanced integrative technique, where you're bringing together all these different ways of processing it. And so that's been
The thing is, and it took me many years to figure this out, but what you have in a human being is the total interconnectivity of every level and part of the person. Mm. So to sort of pull out the physical part and say, well, this must be genetic, or well, we'll give her this drug and that will fix her body. Mm-hmm. That's like having 50 or so people waiting for a banquet, and all you've got is a small turkey, and also it's not the way it functions. I go back in my thinking to Descartes, who thought that the mind was what made a person a person. Mm. That's where we went wrong at the beginning of all of this. Mm. Now, and I'm not the only one who says this at all, but now that we can talk about the full interconnectivity of the body, the psyche, the spirit, and the intellect, mm-hmm. and we can treat on all those levels, because this works no matter whether something is an intellectual issue or a physical one or whatever. So if you accept the obvious, and it isn't obvious to everybody, and it wasn't obvious to me, but what to me now is obvious, and that is that interconnectivity is real. Mm-hmm. You can treat anything that is a part of that human.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd love to talk about that a little bit. So I have here AIT's definition of trauma, which is any occurrence which, when we think back to it or when we're triggered by some present event, evokes difficult emotions or physical symptoms or sensations. It gives rise to negative beliefs, desires, fantasies, compulsions, obsessions, addictions, or dissociation, blocks the development of positive qualities and spiritual connection, and fractures human wholeness. And so when you're talking about, trauma causing all these things and the different types of the way you separate, situational trauma versus developmental trauma, which is probably more of what I was experiencing, right? That type of developmental thing that builds up. So tell us a little bit about what situations and conditions AIT is effective for. I know we talked a little bit about childhood stuff, but chronic illness, I developed autoimmune disease at this point in my life, and this has been a major tool in helping the progression of healing from that, and working with clients who have cancer and chronic illnesses where there's a psychogenic or spiritual blockage to these illnesses that develop. Tell us about that.
You've just beautifully answered your own question.
I'd love to hear it from you and your understanding of how those came together.
Well, once I intuitively felt the interconnectivity of the full human being, and it was intuitive, and I didn't even have words for it for years. Once I knew that, I figured it was just possible that we could actually treat virtually anything. That what you needed to treat some aspect of a human being's traumatic existence was an understanding of what that part was. So, for example, We don't have a manual that deals with addiction yet, because there's something I haven't understood there. And so the work is not complete. But what happened was, in response to clients and in response to my growing number of students over the years, they would come and tell me what they wanted me to write AIT for. For instance, there was one of my students who lived in Portland, Oregon at the time. She's now elsewhere. After they had taken 3 or 4 of the original seminars in AIT, she said to me, you know, this works for almost everything I try it on. Why don't you have material protocols for treating personality disorders? And she looked up at me. She's shorter than I am. She looked up at me and she said, haven't you noticed how many of our clients are personality disordered? We both cracked up, of course, because how could a therapist not notice that these days? It's pandemic. We have a pandemic, and it's not the one everybody's afraid of and talking about. It's having a lot of people who are narcissistic suddenly developing in this country. It took about 3 years till I got the pieces together, but we now have a lot of AIT professionals treating personality disorders with an ease we didn't have before. Mm. And to me, that's a tremendous contribution to what our country needs right now.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy that quite a few people know how to do the work.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating. And I've also started the training in the, being a practitioner of AIT. And what I love about the, technique that you've developed is these ideas of these beliefs, or these, ideas that we hold in our core beliefs, and how when those core beliefs are there, it's kind of like if you think about a computer, right? And the operating system of the computer has this core belief. So no matter what software you put on it, or what, painting you try to make on it, or what document you write, the operating system underneath is going to color or impact the way you do that. So these core beliefs tell us about that and how that impacts somebody's experience.
It very much does so. And also we have the positive qualities, which takes the opposite direction, which is to say, what is one of the things that trauma does to people, and it does it worse the younger the people are, that makes it very hard to develop in a normal way? It's that the positive qualities that are innate to you, that you were probably born with, can be very badly damaged by early trauma. So a child that would have been a happy sing-song kind of child turns into an angry, grunting kind of child, and loses the quality of beauty, let's say, because beauty is not just skin deep. I'm talking about inner beauty. Loses that quality, loses the quality of cleverness, loses the quality of empathy, loses their intuition, becomes negatively sensitive rather than across the board sensitive, which means that they are terribly easily hurt. And they grow up and they go into adulthood, and they can't think of a single quality about themselves that is beautiful or good. That's one of the worst things that happens because of trauma, where I'm concerned, because it ends you up in a little corner crying somewhere all the time. But after we've removed trauma with AIT, we start working with the client on the positive qualities. For instance, earlier this week, I was working with a client who was recovering from an autoimmune disease, and we were getting a very nice and quick result with that using AIT. And I said to her, "You suddenly look very sad. What's going on?" And a few tears came. And she said, "After all that I went through, after everything that I had to treat with my mom, I know it's gone. I can feel it's gone. but I still feel like an ugly sad sack. So I said, let's do some positive quality work. And I showed her how to do it. Very, very simple. And she was doing, oh, beauty, oh, beauty. And she was meaning the inner beauty that a human being can have. And she was practicing that just the way a lot of us do spiritual practice. And before that, we had worked on, oh, intelligence, because her mother had talked her into the idea that she was stupid, not bright at all, not true at all. And I have found that if you just take away trauma, you leave an empty trough inside the person. But if you then fill the trough with the beautiful qualities that are innate or developing in this human being, it's possible for that human being to begin to sense wholeness growing.
Yeah.
It's not enough to treat trauma. You need to help this person become whole again.
So if I understand, correctly, just to kind of summarize for our viewers and our listeners, the AIT includes protocols that allow us to move down through the chakras to remove these traumas, these negative core beliefs, and then actually move up through the chakras to strengthen these positive qualities and, really kind of work on both ends of that, not just talking about the stuff that's gone wrong or the traumas or those sort of things, but actually strengthening the person for their resilience. So, I think I learned so much of it through experiencing it. And I was wondering if you would be able to do a demo for us and show us how some of this works. I'd love to do that with the audience.
Okay. So to do a demo and to do it for real, I need a person with some kind of pain.
I'm here. Shall we talk about a physical pain or an emotional pain?
Whatever comes up and intuitively it's the right thing.
Yeah. So I will share with the audience that I have been experiencing overwhelming grief from the loss of my dog a month ago. And sometimes I process it and I work with it. And then other times it comes over me in a wave. So I think this idea of grief has been deep sadness.
That's a perfect choice. Thank you. So allow yourself to feel the grief and to remember his or her dying. And once you've connected to the fact of its happening and to the feelings, allow yourself to feel on a scale from 0 to 10 how much grief we're going to take away.
So I would say right now I feel it at about a 7 from a 0 to 10 scale.
Okay, and I'm going to use muscle testing to check that. So just say it's a 7.
It's a 7.
There are reversals.
There are reversals.
There are no reversals. Reversals are a phenomenon that makes it difficult to treat easily. So we always take care of it immediately before we treat. In your case, no reversals. So your chakras. Allow yourself to feel where your stationary hand will go. The stationary hand is the hand that tends to rest on the chakra that's carrying the most of what we're trying to get rid of. So put your hand on that chakra.
Yeah, for me, it's the heart.
Of course. And muscle testing validates that. Okay. Now, if you were to put into words what needs to leave, a very, very short, crisp sentence, what would you say?
I think I'd just say all the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Beautiful. So let's do it together. Go ahead.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Forehead.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Chin.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
And every time she muscle tests strong, I move her to the next chakra. Throat.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Heart.
Now over the center again.
It felt like two hands would be better than one.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
The left heart.
Microphone. All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Right heart.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
The solar plexus.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
The navel.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
The pelvis.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
The left crease. This is the crease between the leg and the trunk of the body.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
The right crease.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
And the root chakra.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Okay, so that's one round that we've just done. So please come back to all the sadness that's left from losing Khaleesi.
So from 1 to 10, you're having me kind of feel it again.
Mhm.
I think maybe now it's about a 3.
It's a 3?
It's a 3.
No. Let's try it's a 2.
It's a 2.
Yeah. So we're going to do another round. And the reason that we're not going to take a shortcut is so that it can be thorough. So let's try it again.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Forehead.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Chin.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Throat.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Heart.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Left heart.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Right heart.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Solar plexus.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Navel.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Pelvis.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Left crease.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Right crease.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
And the root.
All the sadness from losing Khaleesi.
Deep breath. So again, come back to the sadness of losing Khaleesi.
I feel like it's a 0 now.
Say it's a 0.
It's a 0.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Yeah, so I've experienced this, when I was, again, 15 years ago, it was just my therapist was just walking me through this, and I would find that I would feel, especially as a sensitive person, I would just feel hotness or energy or tingles moving through my body, or I'd need to kind of twist and get some, energy out or yawn. But it was always, and it still is to this day. I still get regular sessions with AIT, and I find that it shocks me every time that the amount that my mind and body and spirit shift, and I see it in the days and weeks to follow, or if it was causing me anxiety attacks or not sleeping well or nightmares. It's shocking to me how gentle and how almost simple something that's so traumatic can be to release. And that's one of the reasons why I love AIT so much, because of the gentleness of how we're loving ourselves, through that process.
It is gentle, and I'm very happy that it is, because it means that it can be useful to a lot more people.
Yeah.
People who are too sensitive. Remember the old, oh, you're too sensitive? But when we're highly traumatized, a lot of us are too sensitive for real.
Yeah.
And we need to relieve the sense of constant attack that comes with that level of sensitivity.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to do it with AIT, simply because AIT drains the energy of that need to be scared of attack, of the rage that some people feel. It's able to drain out symptom after symptom, whether it's an emotional symptom or a physical one.
Yeah. Yeah. And the way that we sort of did that for my personal experience, I know you teach even people, I know you teach practitioners, and it's this lovely, complex system, but at the same time, it's really simple that people can use this immediately, like in terms of forming a statement for themselves and, doing this. So tell us a little bit about how somebody can apply that same kind of concept or idea.
I would love to do that. In about a year and a half, there's going to be a book coming out, which is a description of an easy version of AIT, and it's called Easy AIT. And I'm co-writing it with Lissa Rankin. She is a person she was a doctor, and she became a person who was very concerned about the human experience and how much suffering there was. And she's applying her considerable gifts in lots of directions. But both of us separately had the idea that there was something awfully wrong with a culture, this is our culture, where only middle-class people and up could get AIT or any other therapy. The people who most need the therapy aren't even underserved, they're not served. And both of us feel very, very strongly that this is the kind of mistake that leads to more suffering for everybody. So I've developed the protocols, or redeveloped the protocols in basics, so that it will be very, very easy for people to read how to do this work.
Awesome.
And there are diagrams and so on, and there are pretty lengthy explanations so that you can see what to do. But even more important than that, I am starting something called Ait Healing Circles. Because, first of all, many people in the world come from cultures where you would never do some equivalent of therapy with just one other person. They feel that the support they can get from a group of like-minded people is much more important than the privacy of being just one person with a therapist. We've been doing this work in Guatemala with Mayan women for the last 18 years. And the women were survivors of the of the Guatemalan Civil War, which went on for 30 years and was actually a genocide of Mayan people. I won't tell you any stories from it. Believe me, you don't want to hear them. So here were these 24 women who found out about AIT and had some initial experience. And they said, we've been raped. We've watched our family members killed in front of our eyes, and a lot more stuff like that, equally serious and horrendous. Can you help us? So I and my team of AIT people, we started coming down every year to Guatemala and working with these 24 women. It's now 18 years later. Each one of them is an AIT teacher, not just a practitioner. Each one of them has a certain group of villages she goes to, and she works with the people in the villages in circles because they feel the circle support is absolutely necessary because of the horror of what they lived. Mm. And we intend to bring this to the United States because we have our own poor people, and we're not doing enough to help.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think you bring up such an important topic too, because I think a lot of, of the kind of therapy and self-help is very individuated. And you're talking also about the idea and the power of healing in community. And I think after, almost, a decade of me doing a lot of healing work and practice and helping others as well, I've really seen that when we do isolate and we obsess or focus on, just something that's happened for us, it doesn't quite cascade outward into our own healing and, our communities in the world. So this idea of healing with others, connecting with greater stories, tell us a little bit about that, because I think that's not a message that we hear a lot in the wellness world or the healing world of community and the importance of connection.
Well, a lot of people on the planet have forgotten that the planet is a human community. And from my point of view, we have been so seduced by wealth, perhaps more in the United States than in other places, perhaps not, but I suspect yes. And that's a sickness. That's obsessive caring about something that doesn't give to the quality of life of the world's people. And I think, in a small way, what I'd like to see develop from our circles is a way of beginning to heal that kind of greed and that kind of obsessive focus on money, because those things aren't healthy. Every time someone calls up and wants to start working with me, and they turn out to be extremely affluent, but they heard about me from so-and-so or in such and such a place, one of the first things I say to them after we've sort of done the beginning stuff that you do in AIT is, tell me how you conceptualize your wealth and why you wanted to have it. Almost inevitably, what comes out, if they look deeply enough, are real deficits in love. And wealth becomes the substitute. Mm-hmm. If it were two other qualities, it might not matter so much. But if there isn't enough love, you have a person who's too deeply wounded to connect, mm-hmm. who's too weak, too deeply wounded to have any empathy for other people. And if you can't have empathy and caring, what you often get are their opposites: hatred, prejudice, and so on. I've been deeply moved in the last couple of years to see what's come up politically, because these issues are suddenly front and center. I've lived for a very long time, and it's the first time I've seen them so front and center since Martin Luther King passed. Mm. So if we are all truly equal, we owe it to the people among us who are poorer and who are more wounded to do the work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you're speaking to the empaths and the sensitive people of the world right now.
I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think a lot of the messages on this summit as well have been about understanding that is a gift, that there isn't something wrong with us. But I think there is this extra layer of not just saying, well, I need to get over myself or get over the stress or overwhelm that I'm feeling, but actually, using techniques like this to release trauma so people can show up and be the change for the world and the next generation. And, I think that's a big through line of being able to heal yourself quickly, effectively, thoroughly, so that we can also show up and be leaders in the world in that way. And for me, a lot of these techniques that, we're presenting here and we're talking about are ways for empaths to step into that power and bring a message of love to the world. So because that's what's been squandered for, so long.
Exactly. I mean, we're the people of the left. And I don't mean that politically. I mean all the left-sided qualities. We're the feminine in very large numbers. And of course, with men who have that developed also. It's not about gender.
Yeah, the yin energy, that feminine energy.
That's right. And it's very important to keep that balance. Because one way of falling into the kind of stuff we've fallen into as a planet is when there isn't balance. I've been working not just with the Mayan women and a lot of other Mayan people, but we've also been working in Guatemala more generally, because although there are psychotherapists there, and a lot of them have fairly good training, there are an awful lot of everyday Guatemalans who are in terrible shape psychologically also. And then some years ago, one of the Mayan women came to me and she said, "Did you know about what happened to the Shinka tribe?" I'm a cultural anthropologist by original training. I didn't even know there was a Shinka tribe. It's so small now. But it's a tribe in Guatemala who, when the Spaniards came, were enslaved to the Spaniards to the point that they do not retain any aspect of their culture. Not the traditional clothing, not the traditional music, not the traditional art, and so on. So we've started treating all of that so that they can find what their new traditions might be, because it's possible to do that with AIT.
Awesome.
So
Yeah,
to me, that's very exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. So for people who are watching and listening and resonating with what we're talking about, or feel as if they have, traumas or some of these issues that they haven't been able to address in the past, where can they learn more? How can they find out more? You've mentioned in the future the book coming out, Easy AIT, but let us know where else they can get more information.
Sure. We have a website which has a very short name, AIT.institute, instead of com or whatever, AIT.institute. There's a lot of information there. And once the first healing circle is about to begin, I will put information out about whom to contact and where and so on. We would like to help everybody.
Awesome. Yeah. So
yeah. There's one more thing I want to mention. Largely in response to what has happened in the United States in the last couple of years, I wrote a new seminar which has to do with the treatment of systemic and racist trauma and historical trauma. And I think it's very important for people to start moving in that direction, because I don't know what will be left here or anywhere if we don't.
Yeah, definitely. So on your website, AIT.institute, people can get information about healing circles and seminars and practitioner trainings, practitioner directory, all of that.
All of that.
Awesome. Awesome. And so given, all these topics we've talked about today and the hope for healing them through a technique like AIT, can you leave us with one thing that the listeners or the viewers can do for themselves, something that they can do to start implementing some of these concepts or taking a step in that direction?
Okay. I think our sharing a positive quality would be the easiest thing for everybody to learn, given that we don't have a regular classroom and so on. So what is the positive quality that you would most like to see develop in the world?
Oh, me, myself.
Yes.
um,
For the whole world, this is.
oh, there's so many. I mean, honestly, I think empathy is a really big one for me because I know we're in this community right now talking to empaths, but sometimes it feels like we have to find our own, space and connection to each other. So empathy for the whole world, I think, would go a long way.
Okay. So let's treat empathy as a positive quality. So this comes from a very old tradition, in fact. And what we begin by saying is the quality itself, but we say, oh, before we say the quality, just to indicate to the divine and to everything that's here how deeply we mean this.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay.
And we're going to go down the chakras to clear out any lack of empathy.
Okay.
And then we're going to take empathy up the chakras.
Okay.
So empathy requires the heart. So I would put my hand on my heart. Lack of empathy.
Lack of empathy.
Lack of empathy.
Lack of empathy.
And while you're saying that, allow the flashes of when you've experienced lack of empathy to come up in you. Lack of empathy.
Lack of empathy.
Lack of
Lack of
empathy.
empathy.
Lack of empathy. Lack of empathy.
Lack of empathy.
Lack of empathy.
Lack of empathy.
Solar plexus, lack of empathy.
Lack of empathy.
On the navel, lack of empathy.
Lack of empathy.
Yeah. Now see how it's going. Just take a sec and see if you feel a flow going down your body. To the pelvis, which is right above where the hair begins. Lack of empathy.
Empathy.
The crease between the left leg and the trunk. Lack of empathy.
Empathy.
The other crease. Lack of empathy.
Lack of empathy.
And the root chakra is behind your genitals and in front of your anus. Lack of empathy.
Lack of empathy.
Take a deep breath. And see how you feel inside. And now let's put in some empathy. Coming back to your root chakra between the genitals and the anus. Oh, empathy.
Oh, empathy.
Other hand on the heart. The pelvis point. Oh, empathy.
Oh, empathy.
The navel. Oh,
empathy.
The solar plexus. Oh,
empathy.
The heart. Oh, empathy. The left heart, which is 3 inches to the left of the heart point. Oh,
empathy.
The right heart. Oh, empathy. The chin.
The chin or the throat?
Throat, sorry. Oh, empathy. The chin. Oh, empathy. The forehead. Oh,
empathy.
And the crown. Oh,
empathy.
A deep breath. See if you can feel your empathy now.
Wow, that was Lovely. I've done a couple of these practices before, but it always feels so gentle. And I feel anybody who was practicing that with us or wants to try it later with a positive quality themselves, they can just follow along those chakra
Absolutely.
centers and repeat those words.
Yeah. Now, let me say just quickly what they need to do to let it continue developing.
Mhm.
So you are going to say, "Oh, empathy," 11 times in a row, feeling as best you can empathy. And you're going to do that. Oh, I left something out. Sorry. So you're going to do that out loud. Then you're going to say, "Oh, empathy," internally with no voice, no sound. And you're just going to say the 11 out loud and the 11 in silence without using the chakras, because what we just did was put your body and your psyche in a position of taking in and working with the quality. You don't have to do more, just your 11 out loud, your 11 in silence, and then see what it feels like inside. See if there's empathy where there wasn't before, or maybe it's increased a little bit, or maybe you've been very, very sad about something of your stuff and there's no room for empathy for somebody else.
Mm.
So if you do that every day for a month, it should make a sizable difference in the level of your empathy. And of course, you can do that with sensitivity, except I would use the phrase positive sensitivity, because I think we all know how painful the other kind can be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like you were saying, you can use these for different positive qualities like beauty or love or patience or any of these sort of things where people can do that practice for what they feel like they need more of.
Right. And let me add one quick practice for intuition, because that's why most of you guys are here. Okay. You need, in order to do this well, you need to have a large communal space like Penn Station in New York, or a concert hall that you happen to be sitting in because there's going to be a concert soon. Some place where there's a lot of people. And it's going to be even more interesting and challenging because most of us in most states are still wearing masks.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say there's a row of people. And I think of it as a row because I somehow intuited to do this on the New York subway. So on the New York subway, there's a row of people sitting across from you. What you do is you ask your intuition to show you who they are. And you start either at the left or the right, it depends on you. And either with your eyes open or closed, you try to take in that person. And you go from one to the next. When I started doing this, I had no intuition to speak of. And I didn't know I had been traumatized away from it. I was just totally ignorant. So if you keep doing that every time you're in this communal place, this large place, I think what you will find is that your intuition starts turning on because it wants to, because the parts of us want to do what they were made to do.
Yeah.
And intuition in particular, because a lot of cultures don't like intuition because it's scary, because the truth might come out. So if you do Grand Central Station, I think you'll be very successful in increasing your intuition.
Yeah, that's lovely. And I know a lot of people talk about getting disconnected from their intuition because of it being painful or for whatever reason. So it's lovely to have a practice to go back into that and start developing it.
Yeah. There was a guy somewhere who said, "The truth shall make you free."
Asha, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with us today. This has been so lovely and peaceful and grounding.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. What a great session with Asha Clinton. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody.